all these products, she says, are made in Canada products. So it does seem to be gaining some momentum. And we did hear from some folks out in Manitoba who say they're getting on the Buy Canadian bandwagon. I don't buy anything from the States. If, if there's any alternative at all, I don't buy anything from the States. I think we'll be careful about where I shop and what I purchase. I'm focused on Canadian products right now. I think it's important that people really think about that carefully. And there are products, of course, that come from the States. Awesome. Buy them if that's what you love, but also be mindful about shopping Canadian if you can. But that's not always easy and not always cheap. We can't produce everything that we need. So when we think about things like, citrus fruits, well, we just don't grow them here. So if we need them, then we have no other option but to buy them from somewhere else. We get 36% of our fruit and 67% of our vegetables from the States. That's a lot. And a lot of stuff we also don't make, like electronics and cars. We might make the parts for them, but then they get made over in the States. So then if we want to buy it, we've got to buy it from an American company. And often, as we were hearing there, those products are a little bit more expensive for Canadians who are already struggling. So let's say the things that we do make here and we can buy here, how do we know we're buying Canadian? So there are some signs you can look out for if you're at the grocery store, and we'll give you a bit of a sense of what to keep an eye out for. There are these two logos that one of them says Product of Canada. That says that it's 98% Canadian. If it says made in Canada, it's more than half Canadian content, 51% or more. And there are also websites that are popping up, like Made in CA, and social media pages that have been popping up that show alternatives, Canadian alternatives to American products. Even Mark Critch and the folks over at This Hour Has 22 Minutes have been trying to lend a hand in figuring out what to buy. What else is on your list? Chips, hickory sticks, orange juice, tomato juice, Old El Paso taco kit, Kraft Dinner, Frosted Flakes, Kraft Dinner, and Kraft Dinner. 2 boxes of Kraft Dinner. I thought Kraft was owned by Heinz. Yeah, but KD is made in Canada. Ketchup, bad, cheesy, does good. What do you drink? Jack Daniels. Crown Royal. Right, because if it sounds English or French, it's probably Canadian. Right. Welcome to the fight, soldier. So it can be funny, but it's a serious topic. If you want to simplify all that sort of complicated stuff, the idea is look for fresh, raw, local products like, apples from Nova Scotia. Pretty easy to determine that that's from Canada. And if it's in season, it's probably more affordable too. Avoid the obvious oranges, Tennessee whiskey if you're trying not to buy American products. Experts say, buying Canadian is not going to stop Trump from putting tariffs in place or walk back those tariffs. It's going to be marginal when it comes to the benefit that it's going to have for Canadian businesses. But for Canadians who want to help, it'll at least make them feel like they're doing something. No, it's important, especially for small Canadian businesses. They always, it means so much to them. It's nothing for the consumer, but every purchase of a small business makes a huge bit of difference. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Linda. You're welcome.
We're listening to uh, an update regarding the recent tariffs that Donald Trump is placing on Canada and Mexico. I thought I'd share this information with you guys. And I will be sharing, the administration's movements throughout Donald Trump's presidency so that we are all aware. I mean, we're all pretty much aware. We all have a smartphone in most cases. And some people have decided to kind of bury their head in the sand, but I've been trying to stay lockstep with what this administration is doing. Because whether or not you want to believe it, the executive orders and different things that are passed under this administration will directly impact our lives in one way or the other. Um, I was listening to this on my own and I said, you know what, let me go live and share it with my community over here on the docket. Hey, how are you? I see you in the chat. Welcome, welcome. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing today. And be sure to set your notifications to all so that you're notified when I go live or add new content. I will be making it a part of my routine, my regular routine, to be live on this channel more consistently. Okay, guys? So we're going to get back to this breaking news.
This hour, U.S. President Donald Trump's promised 25% tariffs on Canadian goods are expected to take effect today. We will continue to bring you ongoing coverage and the reaction from Ottawa as we continue to watch this major developing story. You're watching CBC News Network.
And I'm not sharing my screen currently because I'm on my phone, so I'm unable to share my screen at this time because I'm utilizing my phone to present this information.
It will come today.
Let's see.
This country's economy, courtesy of 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, threatened for weeks by U.S. President Donald Trump, and which the White House has signaled will come today. Now, this is where Trump is spending his weekend at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. So far, he has held off signing any tariff orders on Canada and two other major trading partners with Mexico and China. But tariffs are clearly on his mind. Earlier today, he posted online about a tariff story he had seen on cable television. As we now take a live look at the view from Windsor, Ontario, across to Detroit, the Trudeau government says it is ready to push back against new tariffs, just as it did in 2018 when the first Trump administration imposed similar measures. The Prime Minister promised yesterday, quote, a purposeful, forceful, but reasonable and immediate response in the form of Canada's own tariffs on U.S. imports. Let's go to Ottawa now and get the insights from David Cochrane, host of Power and Politics. David, really good to see you. We're into the afternoon already and still waiting. I thought by this time today,
Excuse me, guys. My bad.
it's really not clear. What are you hearing? Well, the expectation at the top levels of the Canadian government is that we will get clarity at around 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when they expect the formal announcement to come out from the U.S. government. It won't necessarily be a news conference. People keep mentioning the fact that Donald Trump is apparently golfing now at Mar-a-Lago. It's going to be likely a paper release, a news release outlining the official instruments and method by which these tariffs will be implemented. The expectation that people I'm speaking to in the government have is that it will be the scenario that President Trump more or less alluded to yesterday when he spoke in the Oval Office and with what his press secretary Caroline Leavitt said in the White House briefing room. An across-the-board tariff of 25% on everything for Canada and Mexico, and a lower tariff of about 10% on oil and gas. The question is the timing and the implementation of this. His press secretary used the phrase, it would be implemented as of today. That means one thing in trade law, and legally implemented means comes into force this day. It could mean another thing when you're speaking as a press secretary at a lectern in a briefing room. The date given yesterday by the president for oil and gas was February 18th, so about 17 days from now. But the real answer will come in whatever is officially released from the U.S. government, with the expectation being that that is coming in about an hour from now, that it will be the across-the-board 25% tariffs with a 10% tariff for oil and gas, that being the exception, not from being tariffed directly, but just at a lower rate. That's kind of what everyone is bracing for. They have responses ready to go, but they need to see precisely what it is going to be before they go public with what options they will be pursuing in response to session. David, as we wait for that official documentation to come forward from the White House, once these tariffs are in order, what's going to be the immediate impact for ordinary Canadians? Well, it's very difficult to nail that down with total precision, right? Because this is going to have a severe impact on the Canadian economy. Some of the effects will be felt immediately, and some of it will take a longer period of time to seep in. You know, we had an economist on from TD Bank, Bianca Caranci, on the show earlier this week. She's one of the vice presidents there. And she made the point that, you know, tariffs of this magnitude, there's not really something you can model it against, which is what the Bank of Canada suggested as well, because it is across the board and so high, and the duration of it could be indeterminate. But you're going to see a spike in prices, and as it seeps through the economy, if it lasts the full 3, 4, 5, 6 months that the analysis suggests, where you'd see the full effect of things, you're looking at a recession in Canada, the order of magnitude we haven't really seen in this country since the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, 2010. And so you're talking about unemployment going to maybe as high as 10%. You're looking at economic contraction of about 2 percentage points of GDP, maybe a little bit more than that. And the immediate impact on people's household spending and businesses and how they operate, it depends on how much they have in inventories now, in terms of how long they can hold off on having to buy more things from America or deal with the U.S. economy. It depends on their ability to find substitute goods. It depends on the tolerance for this in the United States, in terms of how long businesses there and consumers there are willing to put up with an immediate price shock to many of the things they get from Canada. I mean, Natasha, if you look at the oil and gas tariff, the warning that the Canadian government was sending all around the United States was that if you put a 25% tariff on Canadian oil and gas, because of the reliance of U.S. refiners on that product, mostly from Alberta, you're looking at a 75-cent a gallon jump at the pump. 10% is still about 30 to 35% a gallon at the pump. So there's going to be immediate cost pressures on all sides. The big concern for Canada is how do you retaliate in a way that Americans feel the pinch of this without compounding the damage on the Canadian economy? And how do you support the sectors that are going to be most immediately hit by this? This is really uncharted territory for the Canada-U.S. relationship, to see something this large, this severe, this immediate, and this kind of nonsensical. The Wall Street Journal, in an editorial yesterday, Natasha, called this the dumbest trade war in history, and said that Donald Trump was going to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico for no good reason. But here we are. We know it's coming. We expect details within the hour, and then maybe the response from the Canadian government at some point later this afternoon. Okay, and we'll be covering all of that. David Cochran, host of Power and Politics in Ottawa, thanks so much. Thank you. And also in Ottawa is CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian. So Rafi, all of this is happening while the Liberals will soon be choosing a new leader and a new prime minister. Talk to us a bit of the impact of all of this. Yeah, Natasha, you heard David mention the federal government has a plan. They haven't quite unveiled its details yet. We know they've spoken about a 3-phase retaliatory plan, but of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won't be around to see it through all its phases, presumably. I mean, in about a month, on March 9th, he will step away, and one of a couple of contenders will presumably replace him. The frontrunners in the Liberal leadership race, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, have both spoken about dollar for dollar retaliatory tariffs against the Americans. So there's not much daylight between the two main contenders and Justin Trudeau on this point. Freeland's gone a little bit further. She said Tesla vehicles, specifically the electric Tesla vehicles, have to be tariffed against 100%. That's, of course, a bit of a shot at Donald Trump's administration adjacent figures. Elon Musk, the billionaire Elon Musk, runs the company that produces Teslas. Now, there are some saying the government is still not going far enough. Former Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy had this to say about the idea of retaliation. I mean, I think the thing that Chrystia Freeland is talking about, let's make sure that Tesla cars are no longer sold in Canada. Let's take away the excise tax exemptions from advertisers who put their ads on Facebook or on Instagram, and fundamentally enhance our ability if we do it with others. That gives us the kind of bargaining power and the leverage we need that we don't have just going one-on-one against the United States. And of course, it's not just the Liberal leadership race that's being really shaped by this tariff threat. We've seen Ontario Premier Doug Ford launch his re-election campaign around this idea, and we also have a sense that the general election, the general federal election, will pivot around this. We now know Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has also said that he would retaliate against American tariffs. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa. Thank you, Rafi. Donald Trump has also threatened to impose the tariffs on Canada's oil and natural gas sector, and that could be a major blow to one of the most important sectors of the Canadian economy. So, for more on that part of the story, we are joined now by CBC Sam Sampson in Edmonton. So, Sam, tell us about what the tariffs would mean for the province of Alberta. Well, as you heard, Donald Trump was using some non-committal phrases, right? Well, I'm thinking 10% instead of 25% tariff on oil and gas, and maybe February 18th. So we're still also waiting to hear finite details about exactly what Alberta and this major sector will face. But the thing is, you have to understand this is a hugely integrated system here. The U.S. does rely on Canadian oil, crude oil, mostly from Alberta, for most of its purposes and uses in the United States. And so any tariff, of course, will affect American consumers right at the pump, but that will trickle down to Canadians somehow. And yes, the market is built for this. The price of oil changes all the time, but it's kind of unknown at this point how a new tariff is going to affect it. And that's why we asked Richard Masson, who works at the University of Calgary. He's got more than 30 years of experience advising and also working in the oil sector. And he's wondering, how will this trickle down? Who is going to bear the cost of the tariff? Yes, the refineries have to pay it by law, but how is that going to affect Canadians? Here's what he said.
In my mind, 10% is more likely that the refiners are going to bear that cost than the producers. If it was 25%, I think there might be a big drop in demand for our oil over the course of 2 or 3 months, and that would push it back on us more. But if there isn't much of a drop, then they're going to have to bear it as the refiners. So not as bad if it was 25%. If we are looking at 10%, again, we're still waiting, but that uncertainty is causing a lot of anxiety among people who work in the sector. And I talked to a lot of them yesterday. I went to a bar just outside of Edmonton where a lot of the clientele work in oil and gas. And that's where I met a man named Frank Conance. He's worked in the sector for 40 years. He's retired now, but he picks up shifts every now and then. And he has seen some booms and busts over the days, but he says this time is particularly nerve-wracking.
Who's going to hit us in the pocketbook, provincially, not so much myself personally, but as a province, yeah, we are going to see our oil and gas employees province-wide be affected in that there'll be a diminished demand for their services, diminished demand for the end product because of the cost.
Sam, what's been the response from the provincial government and business leaders? Well, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, her office, their staff just texted me saying, look, we're still waiting to see what exactly is in the fine print here from the tariff order. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith has been working overtime here, she says, to particularly, of course, push back against all tariffs, but specifically ask for carve-outs for oil and gas. Again, she doesn't want any tariffs, but overall, this is the economic engine of Alberta and particularly Canada. So she's even gone down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump, and she's also gone to D.C. to meet with other lawmakers to really hammer this home. Let's try to find a carve-out for oil and gas. And it's unclear if she sees, if we do have 10% versus 25% on oil as an export tariff, does she see this as a win? Some political scientists CBC News spoke with say she might see this as a victory, a small victory, if any. But the decision to maybe lower the tariff, from Donald Trump's point of view, these political scientists suggest, may be more reliant on how Americans would feel at the pump versus Canada's wins. So again, we are hoping to hear more from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith later today. Keep in mind too, while this is, again, if we do see 10%, it's up in the air right now, this is a bit of a sigh of relief for the oil and gas sector, but there are so many other exports that Alberta and the prairies overall give to the United States and sell to the United States. Think of food and agriculture alone. In Alberta, in 1 year, we exported almost $9 billion worth of food and agricultural products. And so, yes, oil and gas, there may be a slight carve out, but the rest of the industries that work with the United States closely, just like the rest of Canada, are on edge. Sam Sampson in Edmonton. Thank you, Sam.
Welcome, everyone. We are listening to breaking news regarding Donald Trump's new tariffs that he has imposed on Canada and Mexico. Uh, the reasoning, from my understanding, is the uh, large amounts of fentanyl that have been trafficked into the United States from Canada as well as Mexico. Um, Now, there is a bit of a discrepancy as it relates to the volume of fentanyl coming into the United States from Canada based on the overall reporting as far as, volume being reported from the airports and things of that nature. The percentage of fentanyl coming from a place like Canada versus China. But this is according to this news report, as well as if you watch the campaign, this was one of his promises to the American people that he is now saying that he is following through with. But there will be an impact to the American citizens as well as Canadians based on what you buy and different goods.
No, nothing. Not right now. No. That's U.S. President Donald Trump speaking last night, saying there's nothing that China, Canada, or Mexico can do to stall his tariffs. He's vying for hefty new tariffs of 25% on goods from Mexico and Canada and 10% on imports from China. And he's tying those tariffs to problems at the border. He says all three countries have failed to prevent illegal immigration and illegal drugs from pouring into the United States. In Ontario, a provincial election campaign is in full swing, and Premier Doug Ford was in Brampton today where he spoke about how he plans to respond to tariffs. CBC's Mike Crawley has the details. Doug Ford is kind of doing two jobs at the moment, right? He is, as you said, campaigning for re-election as the leader of the Ontario PC party. He is also still Ontario's premier, and we were wanting to know a lot about what is he going to do to respond to whatever tariffs come in place. So he had a photo opportunity this morning where he had a big red sign that said tariffs in capital letters, and he fed it into a massive industrial crushing machine to the applause of his local candidates here in Brampton. This is a place where the auto sector employs a lot of people. There's a big Stellantis auto plant in Brampton. And, Doug Ford is talking about protecting auto workers' jobs, talking about what he would do if he is reelected. I wanted to ask him, what are you going to do in the next 4 weeks to respond to these tariffs? He is still the premier and has the power of the provincial government, but he's in an election campaign. So I put that question to Doug Ford. Here's what he had to say.
I'll be going down to Washington on the 11th and 12th. I'll be going back to Washington on the 20th. But we will do whatever it takes to protect the people. We'll do whatever it takes to protect the economy and the communities and the jobs. And we will not spare a penny.
So no specific measures being talked about by Doug Ford at this stage. He's kind of dampened down the talk that he had done prior to the election campaign about perhaps shutting off Ontario's electricity exports to the U.S., taking American alcohol off the shelves of Ontario's liquor store, the LCBO. So he says he needs to wait to see what the actual tariffs are. But again, no specific provincial actions coming from Doug Ford at this stage. And Doug Ford is also campaigning to keep his job. He's in the midst of this election. So how are the tariff threats playing out on the campaign trail? Yeah, it's the absolutely dominant topic of this first week in the campaign. We are really only in early days. Doug Ford's PCs very much want to make this election about the response to tariffs, and they're trying to portray Ford as the leader who is best placed to protect Ontario, which is the Ontario PC campaign slogan. But the opposition leaders, Marit Stiles of the New Democrats, Bonnie Crombie of the Ontario Liberals, they're trying to put forward their own views about what to do about tariffs. Marit Stiles did an interview this morning with the CBC radio show that goes across the entire province. Here's what she had to say. I think that Doug Ford, by calling this election, has shown that he's only in it for one job. And we need somebody who's going to be there to not just fight back hard against Donald Trump, which I will absolutely do, and for every single job, but also to be there to set up programs to care for people when we have to weather this storm. And the Ontario Liberals are saying that basically Doug Ford, by having called this election, is delaying the Ontario government's ability to respond to the tariffs by a month, because technically the government shouldn't actually be taking significant actions while the province is in election mode. Natasha? CBC's Mike Crawley reporting from Brampton, Ontario. Canadian politicians from across the country banded together for what's being deemed Team Canada, an approach to convince the U.S. president to back off on his threat. But just how effective was that strategy, and what could Canada have done instead? For his perspective, we have reached Jorg Broschek. He's a political scientist and Laurier Research Chair at Wilfrid Laurier University, joining us from Kitchener, Ontario. Very good to have you on the show. Yeah, thank you very much. Hello. Jorg, I wonder if we could begin with something you wrote in your analysis on this, saying that Team Canada sounds good but exposes weakness. What did you mean by that? So first of all, of course, it's not a bad thing to have something like a Team Canada approach per se. The question is, first of all, what is it exactly, and why would we need it? And if you take a look at Canadian federalism and how responsibilities are actually shared, de facto, it's trade policy is something the federal government is responsible for, but de facto, the provinces have become much more important since at least the 1980s. So there's a high level of what we would call interdependence, and that requires coordination. Now, the problem is, compared to many other federations, in Canada, we lack a more formalized framework for making this collaboration happen. And just if you take the example, the provinces and the federal government met in person for the first time in January 2015. That was the first time since December 2018. So within a six-year period, there were actually no full in-person meetings. And that shows how weak actually our institutionalized framework for collaboration is. And that would be important, especially if we think about the challenge in a long-term perspective, to have something like a more formalized, routinized mechanism of intergovernmental cooperation. Okay, so let's break all of that down a little bit. With the Team Canada approach this time around, specifically focusing on trying to stop Donald Trump from imposing the 25% tariffs that we anticipate are going to go into effect today, was it a lack of a clear mission? Was it?
Hold tight, guys. Hold tight.
A lack of leadership? What do you think was
Okay, there we go.
the case? So first of all, we need to maybe really break down what Team Canada actually means, and I think there are different connotations associated with that. So essentially, in trade policy, it used to mean the federal government has the leadership role and offers the provinces to participate in a meaningful way. And this is what we've seen, for example, for the first time
really, more recently under the negotiations for the Canada-European Union Free Trade Agreement under Stephen Harper. That was where Team Canada was really a big thing. It was reactivated again when CUSMA negotiations in 2017 came up. That means when Donald Trump threatened to terminate NAFTA, it worked quite well. The question is now we have a monumental crisis coming up. And with the leadership vacuum in Ottawa, it seems more that the provinces are important drivers at the moment. So it's no longer primarily the federal government who does this. So this is in the realm of federalism. But then there's a third, in addition to the province and Ottawa-led model, a third connotation, and that means really Team Canada more broadly conceived, engaging stakeholders.
I'm going to skip a little through this, guys, because they received confirmation that Donald Trump signed off on the tariffs.
Earlier in the day, we spoke with Lloyd Axworthy. He's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and the chair of the World Refugee and Migration Council. And I asked him how he thinks Canada should respond to the tariff threat.
I think this is a very important opportunity for Canada to exercise some very important, active, and outgoing diplomacy. We have to find new partners. We have to collaborate. We have to develop new relationships. And I think we can take these the hallucinations of Donald Trump as a basis for rethinking and resetting the role that we play. And I think, by the way, Natasha, this is one of the mistakes that we've made right so far is trying to go one-on-one with the Americans, ignoring our partner in the trade agreement in Mexico, not working with other countries who feel equally threatened. And I think that maybe now that the Hail Mary in Washington hasn't seemed to work, I think we should get back and start doing what Canadians do well, which is to convene and bring together other countries to kind of constrain the Trump imperialism.
So, Mr. Axworthy, what exactly would that look like? Mexico's going to be hit with the same tariffs. European Union is getting threatened. I don't know if China is necessarily a partner we would want to work with as it currently stands. How do you see this moving forward?
Now, in all reality, if these tariffs, well, he already signed them, signed off on them. So once they go into effect, I'm wondering, what is the cost going to look like for all of the goods that are being imported into the U.S. for the United States population. The oil and gas and food prices. Are we going to see a rise in that?
Like businesses across the country, those in the maritime provinces are concerned about tariffs and the impact they'll have on their economies. We get more from CBC's Brett Ruskin in Halifax.
The 20 billion, 25% for future. So that's
Hold on. I'm skipping through a little bit, guys, because I had went back. I'm trying to get.
Potentially sending the cost of
There we
living on
go.
this side of the border soaring, as well as having a dramatic impact on many goods that we send into the United States. The Prime Minister, the government, promising retaliation after the apparent failure of last-ditch negotiations and efforts to stop these tariffs from being put in place at all. Now, the president did put tariffs in place during the first Trump administration in 2018, but in that case, just on steel and aluminum. In this case, we are expecting broad-based tariffs across all goods going from this country to the United States at 25%, though the president indicated yesterday that Canada's oil and gas would be tariffed at a lower rate of 10%. The prime minister says the response will be, quote, purposeful, forceful, and immediate. Here to help us with our coverage throughout this very important afternoon, David Cochran, who's the host of Power and Politics, and senior Washington correspondent Katie Simpson. So glad that you are both here to help us guide us through what is going to be a critical day for the future of this country and for the relationship between Canada and the United States. David, let me start with you in terms of what we are hearing from government officials about.
And just so we're clear, this is a Canadian broadcast. They're the only people right now talking about the tariffs that are currently in place and set to go into effect on Tuesday. of this coming week. So I'm guessing American media may share some information with the American public soon.
And we will hear from the Prime Minister and his ministers sometime later today. So we'll bring all that to you, of course, as soon as we get it. We also are refreshing the page on the White House's website to see what they are going to post there. Yeah, Donald Trump views tariffs as a tool to generate wealth, and he made that clear during the election campaign. He described himself as the tariff man and said that tariff was the most beautiful word in the world, and said he loved the word tariff. So it's not surprising he's going this route, and he has a number of different goals. The first is he does see it as a revenue generating tool, even though it is American companies. So when a tariff is put in place, it is very important to remember is the American company that is importing the foreign good. They are the one that actually gets out the debit card, gets out the check, and pays Custom and Border officials the 25% increase. What that can do in the United States is it can make Canadian and Mexican goods far less attractive because they are far more expensive. It can cause disruptions in the supply chain, so there could be some immediate price hikes for American products and that kind of thing. It's all in line with Donald Trump wanting to bring those manufacturing jobs back to the United States, as David just mentioned. But also, Donald Trump has a pretty ambitious agenda when it comes to the changes he wants to implement in his second term. And a lot of it is very expensive. Ramping up immigration and enforcement, building the border wall, those kinds of initiatives are incredibly expensive and will likely need more money, more revenue to deal with that. Big tax cuts that he's promised, particularly to some of the wealthy and major corporations, that is something that he wants to sort of have an offset for. And even though it is those American companies that will be like paying it in this moment, he sees this as sort of a way to realize supply chains, bring jobs back to the United States. He expects that manufacturers will want to avoid the tariffs, so they'll come back to the United States, set up shop, and start doing that kind of thing.
That doesn't mean that doesn't there's no guarantee that these people will come back to the United States and bring jobs back, manufacturing jobs and otherwise back to the United States. That could actually cut off different goods, products, and goods that America receives from Canada. Because if it's too costly, if it's not cost effective, if the profit and if the P&L, the profit and loss doesn't line up for many of these companies, they may just sever ties in general because they'll see it as not no longer good business. You understand? So it's a gamble. It is a gamble, but I guess the Trump administration is okay with rolling the dice.
Donald Trump has had a wide range of reasons of motivating this behavior. Of course, it started with threats about border security, saying, listen, we're putting these tariffs in place unless you stop the flow of illegal drugs, specifically fentanyl, into the United States, lumping Canada and Mexico together as the same kind of threat, even though the situation at the northern border and the situation at the southern border are very, very different. And he wanted to stop the flow of illegal migration. But that has changed. We've heard him complain about the trade deficit. We've heard him complain about thinking that the United States has been treated unfairly, not just by Canada, but by the rest of the world. There have been complaints about Canada not doing enough to spend on its national security, national defense, those kinds of things. So it really sort of ranges, it's the entire gamut of complaints and reasons. Okay, Katie, stay right there. I believe David has a little bit of news for us to update us on when we can expect the timing of things, David.
Yeah, the timing, we're going to hear the federal government's response tentatively at 6 p.m. tonight in terms of what they're going to do. But I can tell you that they were told this morning in broad outlines that it will be the 25% tariff across the board on all goods, 10% on oil and gas. This will come into force on Tuesday, is what was communicated to the government of Canada from top officials in the government of the United States. And it will remain in place until the Trump administration or Trump himself is satisfied that the fentanyl situation is under control.
So that is what was verbally communicated to the government of Canada today. They are still waiting on the official notification in a paper form, the legal instrument, that will announce how this is being enforced. But 25% tariffs across the board coming into force on Tuesday of next week, 10% on oil and gas, and it will stay in place until the fentanyl situation is resolved to the satisfaction of the United States administration. So the expectation is there's some talk of a cabinet meeting at some point this afternoon, in which the government will finalize or take decisions on what its response might be. And Dominic LeBlanc, who has traveled here to Ottawa today, I suspect will be with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tentatively to respond to the actions from the United States at around 6 p.m. Eastern Time here in Ottawa. Okay, thank you for that, David. So just for people to remember, this is not something that is going to take weeks to implement, as the president suggested yesterday. This is going to happen very, very quickly. We are going to get the details of how this will work, as David said, but it will go into effect as of Tuesday, which also means that the Canadian government has to get its response together and have potential counter tariffs ready to go by Tuesday as well. And David, I know there was some conversation about matching the scope of those tariffs, but I also know that there's some hesitation inside government about going too big, because there's also a lot of damage that could be done if Canada matched dollar for dollar. So I'm not sure if you know where that's at this stage, or if they're still contemplating the best kind of response.
Now, if this does spark a trade war and Canada decides to match the tariffs on the United States, this could create a major hike in prices of goods and different products that the United States imports from Canada. So I will be staying on top of this situation, keeping you guys up to date and in the know. I feel it's necessary for us all to be aware of what our government is doing and also not doing, so that we can see clearly what, you know, where changes need to be made. Um, will America be Republican or Democrat in the future elections? Or will it shift back to a Democratic government? Will we have a Democratic president or a Republican president? Only time will tell. But in the interim, I feel that it's important for everyone to, you know, be informed, stay informed. All right. I'm going to get up out of here. I just wanted to share that bit of information with you guys today. Replay gang, how y'all doing? I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or night based on wherever you're tuning in from. Be sure to give us a like and a share. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing today. Be sure to set your notifications to all so that you're notified when I go live or add new content. I will also be updating you guys on Sean P. Diddy Combs at some point. Right now, they're just currently going through motions and different things, preparing for trial. It does appear that this will be going to trial at this juncture. There has been no offer of a plea or any plea agreement discussions. So I will keep you guys up to date on that as well. But that's all from me today. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for watching. And let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.